Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you might be, and welcome to this training workshop on prototyping privacy policy and terms of use documentation for the EOSC portal. Thank you for joining us, wherever you might be. A few words about me before we begin. My name is Andreas. I am a communications consultant for Arctic, and I am providing minor hosting duties before letting Prodomos take over for the rest of this workshop. We have about 1.5 hours to spend together. This is going to be a little bit more hands-on than the previous workshops. Those of you who were there, I'm assuming that's a majority for the workshop that previously took place on the 7th of December, will recall that we covered a training on how to write privacy policy and terms of use documentation for the EOS portal. This workshop is designed as an opportunity for you to come forward with your questions and with your own documents in need of a second pair of eyes. Depending on how many of you already have documentations and questions to submit, we might be able to have the time to review those during the workshop itself. Should that not be the case, what I would recommend is that you ask your questions, and then we'll do our best to provide answers to them. And if later on you can think of examples to share of documents that would need expert attention, then I am told that our trainers will be happy to have a look at them later on. Should there be too many documents and too many questions for the time available to us, I would suggest that you consider which already covered documents, in whatever way they might come forward, most closely resembles your own. So in that way, we might be able to cover a wide range of examples over the 90 minutes that we have. Now, without further ado, let me leave the word to Prodomos Tsiavos from OpenAir, who shall be taking over the main event. He has already been hosting for you the training on the 7th of December. I am looking forward to it. Once again, thank you for your attention. Be sure to keep your microphones muted at all times and to raise your hand using the corresponding buttons in order to seek attention. If you do want to share a document, let us know, and I will make sure to make you a co-host for the duration of your required time. Thank you, and over to you, Prodomos.
Thanks very much. I think, and first of all, welcome everyone. We're really glad to have you online with us today again. And I will echo what was said before. At this stage, I would invite anyone that actually has a document, which is either a privacy policy document or a terms of use document, to share it with us. I mean, if you can indicate this as an example of something you would like to discuss, please share it at the chat box so that we are able to start the discussion from that point. I think that would be a good starting point. And by the time this happens, I will be, what I will do is I'll go back to the presentation that you have seen in our previous seminar. Okay, actually I won't, since I saw someone that actually has shared one. Perhaps, I don't know if it is Venkat or someone else that could make our co-host as well, so that we can talk about this this policy document together at this stage. I don't know if Carl Frederick would like to say a few things. So if I could pass the mic to him first to say a few things about the policy, and then we can go through this policy together and discuss it. But I don't know first if Carl, you would like to give us a kind of a context in relation to what this is and how it relates to questions you may have in relation to this policy.
This is a document I wrote a couple of years ago. I think it was related to one of these projects related to EOSC, the EGI competence center, or it could even have been the ENRIFAIR project. I don't recall that right now, but I did have a template to follow. So if you have comments on the content here, one question, for instance, if that we have to specify a certain time limit or not for how long we keep our log files and things.
Right, excellent. Thank you so much for doing that, for sharing the document. Let me share the screen with everyone. Oops. Again, if you could allow me to share, it would be great. Or let me try once more. If you can turn me into moderator or something so I can share things. Yes.
Prodromos, you are co-host. You should be able to share
I should
screen,
be able to do it now. All right. So you see the privacy, this privacy policy, and as Carl Frederick said before, it's based on a template. By the way, that's always useful because it allows us to actually understand, make sure that certain bits and pieces are not forgotten. So I'll go through this and say a few things, what I find as things that have been done very well and things that could be done, we could improve. First thing that relates to the discussion we had in our previous meeting, this is something which actually it's good that to actually differentiate the terms of use from the privacy policy, or if we have a privacy policy, to have it stated very clearly that this is it. And I'm saying that because in the terms of use, we find other types of provisions as well, such as intellectual property rights or other types of obligations related specifically to the service. Having said that, we start that the first good thing that you have is that you have a date when the policy was introduced, and that's quite important for people to understand how old it is, and it gives an indication of how frequently you update it. Another thing you could do is when it has started, so to have a versioning history. So to say, for instance, this policy was initially introduced is in effect, as it says here, since August 24, 2021, version 1.0, version 2.0 was introduced then. So you have a versioning type of history of the service, of the terms of service or the privacy policy. I definitely suggest that from the big service providers. Twitter does that, and it's extremely useful because it allows you to see what you can do with historical data you obtained from the particular service at previous times, particularly if you do some kind of scraping. Second thing, which I find here very good, is the fact that you have this description of the service, and in particular here it is a description of the purpose of processing of the data. I remind you what we have said in the previous meeting, in the previous seminar. You need to identify what is the purpose of the data processing, and then what kind of data are being collected and how they're processed. And as we will see later, also the duration of the processing. Now, one thing here that I would change. We have this point here. It says initially. Information the user's affiliation needs to be retained to enable funding agencies to track data usage per associate and affiliate. Good. As a consequence, EOSC Scientific Association may process personal data for the operation of these services. I think what we instructions we get from different data protection authorities is to be very clear that it is processed or it isn't processed. So, so this expression may process is not something I would have in this policy. It processes personal data or it doesn't. You need to be aware of that. You cannot leave it like that.
Thanks.
Yeah?
Good point. I think that
Yeah.
wording might actually have come there from a template somehow. So
yeah, it used to be before GDPR, we had that as a classic wording found in multiple services. But now, so this was the case even before the introduction of GDPR, but now it's much more clear that we need to be clear. We either do it or not. Another thing, which is a kind of minor detail, but would be always a suggestion, and sometimes I have debates with colleagues about that. My personal preference would be to have a data protection policy if it's a data protection policy, and a privacy policy if it's a privacy policy. Now, that's again something which is not necessary, but let me explain what I mean. If it's personal data only, so it doesn't have to do with personality of people, so you don't collect images, and it's just like things that clearly go under the GDPR, then call it data protection policy, so people know what they will be looking for. Privacy is a broader term. Of course, it covers data protection, but it also means other things. It's also a term which is used mostly in a more international level, so it's not just European. It's a term that is understood also across the Atlantic by other jurisdictions. So I'm not adamant about it, but I'm always in favor of data protection if data protection is what you're doing. Okay, privacy notice. Now, this is not a notice again. So it's a question whether it's a notice or a policy. A notice, a notice may contain the policy. A policy tells which are the things you should be doing as an organization. So again, be careful with what it is. My feeling is that this could be seen as a notice because it has all the elements required. But let me give you an example. The way in which I treat the personal data of my employees is a policy. The way I express that to them is through a notice. So this is a notice, and behind it, there's a privacy policy or a data protection policy. For instance, the fact that you make a choice to retain the data for 3 years after the completion of the project, that's a policy decision, and you are expressing that in a notice. So this is correct here, but I'm just explaining the difference between the terms. Good to know the name of the service, description of the service, radar online schedule. Now, this is correct, the description of the service. The question is, you see in the preamble that the information needs to be retained to enable funding agencies to track greater data usage per associate and affiliates. I would like some of the description of that element to be expressed here. So for instance, what I would do, I would have this description of the service. Of course, request and data download portal, it includes that these who can request and download the data can be also funding agencies. But if you wish to be more explicit, you can be here. Data controller and contact person, just to make sure, EOSC is a legal entity, correct? It is a legal person. Carl Frederick, can you hear us?
Yes, hello. I'm just taking notes about the comments you had.
Yeah. So EOSC, as I understand, right, is a registered non-profit organization, but it's a legal entity, correct, as well?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a detail which I have seen multiple times, and you may ask why not. I mean, it says here it's registered not-profit organization in Sweden. It could be that it is an organization without a legal form. So it could be a kind of de facto consortium between different organizations. Why is this relevant? It is relevant because if we have a legal entity, we clearly have a controller. We legally have a legal entity which is responsible for the processing, for setting out the objectives and the means under which the processing is going to happen. If this is not a legal entity, we need to know whom from the consortium has a responsibility to do that on behalf of the consortium, and this has to be appearing in the consortium agreements or the through a decision taken by different members. Now, here I'm a bit lost because you have contact person services, and then you have questions should be directed to the director of ASCADs. Normally, I would suggest the contact person to be an email where people can find either be a generic one like services or an organization or the DPO of the organization if it exists, or legal, anyway, how someone which you make sure that they can express their concerns about the policy, and most importantly, have the data subjects able to express, to exercise their rights. I wouldn't put just the DPO in the contact person. I would have someone which we know they can address the questions. Here, it's a bit confusing because I have a contact person in the data controller and contact person line, and then another one on the supervisory authority. My feeling is that the supervisory authority, it means what is the data protection agency in your jurisdiction. So here would be the DPA, Sweden's DPA, not the director of ASCAD itself, right? Jurisdictions, and of course it could be you have to choose which one is the data, who is the supervising authority. By the way, I'm a bit confused by the fact that is registered in Sweden, Norway, and Finland. So I don't know what that means. It could be that is registered as a non-profit, but the question here is where is it based as a legal entity? So ASCAD may be registered because different countries have non-profit companies registries or non-governmental organization registries. So it could be that in all these 3 jurisdictions you can do it. But still, the question here is for the data subject to have an understanding of what is the courts which are competent and what is the legal authority they should go to if they feel that they have asked you, they have addressed a complaint to you and you haven't responded. So this needs to be changed accordingly.
Rodromo, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm quite sure you cannot see the hands raised and comments in the chat. There was an hands raised by Andrea Tarallo before, and then a question by him in the chat. How do you want to deal with this? Can people interrupt you whenever?
But they can. I just didn't see Andrea's question, but I'll answer it now. The controller they have to be, I mean, they can be a non-legal entity, they can be a natural person, but in our context, it's very, very difficult. In our context, the controller, legally they could, but the controller is normally going to be a legal person, so a legal entity. And if it is a consortium, again, it's going to be a legal entity, but it has to be one of the legal entities that comprise this consortium. If it is a de facto, let's say an association of scientists, which are only natural persons, human beings, then again, they will have to assign to someone to operate as the data controller. for that particular collection of data. So my answer is legally, yes, it can be a non-legal entity. It cannot be. It can be a natural person. There is no problem. But practically speaking, it cannot. In our context, it would be unthinkable. I don't know if there are other questions. I see there are other policies, but I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, there is a question by Robert Ulrich.
Ulrich, can I just refer to the Institute's data privacy? Yes, to one. So if you have multiple, I mean, in terms of the, I don't know if the question is in relation to the contact person. In relation to the contact person, for sure, I always suggest to have the DPO plus someone from the organization, because remember, the data protection officer advises and instructs. You need to have someone who's actually going to answer the question, and that's why in the contact person we would like to have someone that comes from the organization, not the DPO. In terms of the let me give you an example. For instance, I want to object to certain processing of my data. I should be able, ideally, to send an email to ASCAT or whoever is the data controller. So I need an email for that. And perhaps CC the data protection officer, so they know I have done it. So if they don't respond on time, they're going to go and say, look, you have to answer this one. But even the data protection officer is not able, will not be able to answer my question. They would relay me to the relevant, the competent person within the organization. So we need to see. Yes, of course, you can refer to the DPO, but it cannot be just that particular person. And I hope, Robert, I've answered your question. If not, please come back with a follow-up. Let me move to the next section, which is personal data processed. That's very good. Again, that's fine. I would say, again, I wouldn't say may. Either you retrieve or you don't. Okay, and these are all personal information which are gathered from the EGI services. Now, what I see here is that personal data are also gathered from yourself, which means we directly ask you to provide such data. Now, if at the moment, we will see later the legal basis. At the moment of collection of such data, if the legal basis is consent, this notice becomes a consent form. So it expresses all these things, and you need to get the explicit, prior, informed, and free consent of the data subject. If the legal basis is not consent, but something else that doesn't require these things, then what we need is these people to have read this notice before they give their data. So that's a kind of an important procedural question. Ideally, you should have this one being something that the data subject would see before or they give their data, or at least to have it at a point where they can prominently see it once they provide their data. Purpose of processing of personal data. Okay, what I would put here, and of course this is something you could see in the description of the service, but also in the purpose of processing, you should be able to explain what you're doing with this. So the first thing I see, I'm going direct to the second bullet and third, and then I go to the first one. Log, monitor, and debug the operation of the services, detect possible abuse of the services. So it's a question, first of all, to whether this is, it means only that you're doing that yourself or not. So when you go to the third parties, I'm going here, if in any way they support you in doing that, you need to express how this is being done. So whether you are sending the data to a third party for some reason. So you have it here in the parentheses, but I suppose this is not for those two purposes. So the purpose of processing is not just about the things you're doing yourself. yourselves, but also why are you sharing with someone else? Why you're sharing with someone else, I should be able to see it in the purpose of processing of personal data. I remind you, processing is not just information processing. Divulging the information to third party amounts to processing. Also, if you have here reference to applicable statutes, applicable requirements, funding policies, legal requirements, for each one of them, we need a link. So we need to be able to understand which are the statutes, which are the applicable requirements, which are the funding policies, which are the legal requirements. Also, it's not clear why you need this personal data for grant usage. I would like this to be a bit more deciphered. What does it mean, practically speaking? Now, another key thing here is the legal basis. Legal basis, ideally, it should be one. We cannot have concurrently multiple legal bases. What we could have is a legal basis for purpose A of processing for this data, and another legal basis for another type of purpose of processing of this data. For instance, compliance with a legal obligation. It could be or legitimate interest. It could be the reason why I process the data for logging, monitoring, and debugging the services. And providing the data to a third party, it could be a legal obligation. Here, I'm totally lost by the fact that you have controller or by third party, so you mix quite a few things. So for me, it's not clear right now what the legal basis is, and this is pretty important. Also, if you have legal obligation, you should state the law and the provision under which this legal obligation arises. So for me here, I'm not sure what that is. And that's pretty important. If instead of legal obligation, you have public task, which to me seems more reasonable, you need to make sure you assign it to the proper data type. So logging, monitoring, and debugging of the service is something that may require some processing of personal data, and this may be the result of legitimate interest. Detect possible abuse of services. It could be something that comes under legal obligation or not. I don't know. Grant usage in accordance with EOSC statutes. This again could be legal obligation. But in order to assess whether legal obligation or public task or anything else, actually, especially legal obligation and public task is the legal basis, I need a provision. So I need some kind of law or something saying something about it. So for me, this is pretty weak here. Again, third parties to whom personal data is disclosed, we need to understand why. If we were to have outside the EU transferring of data, we would have to understand also whether this is somehow classified as a safe service in terms of the processing. So we need to see.
Just a comment about this. So this may be a quite common case.
Which one?
The third party to whom personal data is disclosed. Within the EU, GRNet, the check-in service provider is mentioned, and this is probably due to the fact, but please, Carl Frederick, confirm or don't confirm about this. This is probably due to the fact that access to this service is done through an AAI service, which is the check-in service. This is quite common in the EOSC environment. So if this is the case, maybe this explanation is enough. Maybe check-in service provider could be complemented by a sentence saying that the service used for authentication and authorization or something like that. Would this be enough or not?
Okay, good, very good question. Thank you, Luciano. That's a very good question. First of all, do we give data to GRNet, or are we receiving data from GRNet? Or
I would
both?
say we receive the data, but on the other hand, if the user doesn't have an EGI account, we send them to EGI to sign up for an account with the AAI provider.
Sorry, we send them to EGI to do what?
They have to have their identity, some of their identity providers linked to the check-in AAI.
True,
But you are right. But you're right that we use the check-in AAI to receive information rather than provide information.
No, this is very important. So if we use that in order to receive information, good that we're saying that, but it's not that we're disclosing, we're receiving. So they know here that there is a chance under A that we get from the EGI services. So we are covered here. We don't disclose data to a third party.
So then we don't actually have to mention anything in the disclosed data.
No, you can have the GRNet EG here in the EGI services, but here, or a link to what the EGI services are. You don't need to have it here as well, because you don't give the data to them. If you were to give to anyone data, ideally you should say something about their terms of processing such data. But this would be in the legal basis. That's what I was trying to say before. That first of all, if you have any providers or whatever entities to which you are providing data, you need to explain to the data subject why you're doing that. It could be just a GRNet, for instance, from their side, they should say, we provide your personal data to these service providers because we operate the check-in service. So that's enough.
Brother Ramos, if I understand correctly what you said, in this specific case where there is a service using an external service for AAI, we don't need to state this because there is no transfer information to GRNet in this specific case.
Yes,
on the
exactly.
contrary, from the GRNet side, from the operators of the check-in service, they have to state in their privacy policy that the data they will collect in these in their services for authentication and authorization will be transferred partially or totally or whatever to a number of different services using check-in to perform AAI. Is this correct?
Exactly, and I agree also with the comment that Maggie has made on the chat box. I think we need to agree on the standard text, because these are very classic transactions. But as you've just said, Luciano, that's more a GRNet issue rather than an ASCAT issue for what we're discussing now. Huh?
Okay, good, thanks.
Okay, how to access, rectify, and delete the personal data and object to its processing. I think it's all right. It's just always here. I would be a bit reluctant to. I would say contact the contact persons. I would just put again the email. To rectify the data released by your home organization, contact their IT help desk or its equivalents. Again, now this is a bit confusing, withdrawal of consent, because you don't have consent here. So I would put, if the consent is not on the legal basis, then I would say this is not applicable. There's no withdrawal of consent in your case. Data retention and deletion. You need to say something about the duration of the retention and under which circumstances and how deletion is going to take place. Data retention doesn't need to be specified in terms of always of date. it could be that we're going to, this is a moment where you see the policy. So you could say we're going to retain to retain the data for as long as the service runs, plus X amount of years for auditing purposes. And deletion, of course, by the way, I would keep the it's also important to explain why you're keeping the data. And I'll explain that. In terms of deletion, you have to express how deletion is going to be take place. So for instance, a deletion will be happening every X amount of years, and or the deletion is going to be administered and documented by the chief of IT. Something like that. Now, in terms of the data retention, what I want to say before, data retention has to match some legal basis. So for instance, why are you collecting this data? I'm collecting this data because I need it in order to monitor the use of my services. And what is the legal basis behind it? If you ask me, this is either legal interest, or it is consent, or it is public task, depending how you're going to frame it. So let's assume it's a public task, and for some reason, or legal interest, and you keep retaining such data. Then the next thing is, how long are you going to do that? You're going to retain this data for as long as it serves these purposes. If it is retained beyond them, then it really doesn't make sense. So if you cease to offer these services, you need to get rid of the data as well, and you need to have someone to document that the deletion of the data took place. Security. Again, this is a question because I don't know in the notice how much you would like or you would be willing to say. What you have here is a pretty generic statement, which for me is sufficient, but it is necessary in terms of policy yourselves to have made an audit of how you can retain you can ensure that the security is there. So you need to know whether your personal data are kept by a firewall. I'm saying some super simple things, how you keep a log of who has accessed them, how there are specific roles of people who have access to the personal data, and for reasons that relate to the process, the purpose of processing we expressed before, and so on and so forth. So here, I wouldn't necessarily expect the security to be super detailed, but I would like to have something that tells me about security, slightly a bit more things, even if it's not placed here internally. There needs to be a very clear security policy. Finally, in terms of the code of conduct for service providers, again, if you have a link, it would be great to have it. So I think this is overall a good policy. If there was a point which I think is the most important here, is to make sure that the legal basis is correct. Other than that, I think it should do. So let me see questions. I agree with Maggie. This is in terms of deletion, and this is something that relates very much to security questions, but it's also to protocols and processes within your ICT departments. So it's not so much to the fact that first of all, it's important to keep the personal data at one point. That's not necessarily true in quite a few of the organizations. I have seen the less integrated in organizations, database is especially users or customers, the more likely it is that personal data are all over the place. And that means that's extremely difficult to express, to document and explicate how they are deleted. So all you can do, I think first of all, the more you have them in a specific system, the easier it gets to do it. But even then you will have some backups or other things where the data are going to be retained. So again, here you have to explain why you are retaining them. In terms of the deletion itself, just the documentation of who did it and when, for me, would be enough to start with. Because if the data are being found later, then you have to be able to explain why they haven't been deleted on that particular date by that particular person. So you have to say which data they are deleted and when. You don't need to make this super public, but you need to document them. Do data deletions always have to be documented? What if it's automated? Then you need to have a log. It doesn't matter if it's automated or not. It could be that they are deleted every 2 months in order to free space. But even in that case, you need to somehow log it, and especially who is responsible for the process or for monitoring the process.
Prodromos, Maggie wants to comment probably.
Yes.
Her end raised.
By all means.
Yes, thank you very much for letting me come in and just ask a question. No, for me and for us in my organization, this thing about the backups is actually quite important, because I fully agree with you that it's very important that personal data are localized at a specific place in the system, but not all personal data can be located in one place, because for instance, personal data is also, even if it's sorts under this what did you call it, legitimate interest and things like that, just the fact that we, for instance, may be having a list of journal articles that have been published that are connected to the data sets or to our services, then we have the names of the authors, and that is obviously not stored in the same place as where you would keep, for instance, a log of people who have uploaded data sets to our services, and therefore need to be contact persons and things like that. So it is something where I think it would be really useful to have a maybe slightly more detailed guidance, but in bullet forms, but in text, and not just in the form of this narrative discussion that we're having today, which I really appreciate. But it's difficult to retain and extract the knowledge from a session like today, and then try to, from memory or whatever, try to apply it then in an organization. That's also why I was hinting in the other comment about having access to a list of templates, text strings or something, which one can really use, because I think that's what many of us, so like Carl Fredrik, I also come from a researcher point of view rather than a administrative slash law related training. So we are trying to do our best here, but obviously not getting it all right in the first attempt, and that's why it's so valuable to have access to experts like yourself today. But I'll leave it at that. I just wanted to raise awareness of this fact that the backups can have a lot of stuff in them that you don't remember that they're still there.
Yeah, I think this is something which has multiple dimensions. It goes back to workflows and processes and their standardization I think in the IT department primarily. But this is certainly something we need to be actively doing. I mean here, so I think this is something which very much relates to what is the minimum, what is the maximum, and how you can actually work in between the two.
I would just point out that I think that when you say IT department, it seems to me that you are referring to like that everything is being organized in a proper data center or something like that. But that is not the way that many research infrastructures at least operate, because they are their own IT department / development / data storage / whatever. I think that's also extremely important to recognize that there's a huge diversity in the terms of how data providers and service providers to the EOSC are organized themselves, how much built-in competence at various topics that they have, and how much they are relying on external parties, which could also, of course, be say the legal department of a hosting university or something like that. But they are often also not at all aware of all of these things. So that's why it's important that we have this minimum standard and that we get it more or less right at, let's say, the third attempt. rather than keeping these old sourdoughs, which are just fermenting away somewhere and then will explode, possibly with a lot of loss of not only goodwill and things like that, but also with legal consequences if we don't do this right.
Sorry. Again, this is a good point. I'm going back to the things we should be doing precisely because this diversity exists. And you're right, Maggie. Sometimes I'm getting because I see a lot of big organizations. So you're right. This is clearly what I had in mind. A situation where things are a bit more organized. But you're right. This is not the situation everywhere. And we need to be very conscious of that. Perhaps one of the things we should be doing is to provide this kind of more technical guidelines in relation to how we tackle these issues. So different groups can actually implement them even with minimal resources. And I'm pointing that to my colleagues to discuss it afterwards. What is the follow-up from this session? Because these are the kinds of understandings we get.
Yeah. If I may comment on this, I think that it is very important that we here discuss the main use cases we people can face while preparing this document. So far, I understood there are two specific use cases. The first one concerns AAI, using the case where a service relies on an external service to authenticate and authorize people. So this is quite well known, and the solution is quite good. It is quite clear. The Maggie has proposed a different use case, and I guess many more could be identified. So the first thing, in my opinion, is to collect the short description of these use cases so that we can think about how to include some technical guidance in a sort of templates or documents or whatever. So maybe people could to do this could send the description of the use cases they face or they think are important to the onboarding mailing list, so that we can collect all of them and then discuss internally how to deal with them. What do you think, Brother Moss?
I agree. I think this is necessary for us to be able also to provide something more comprehensive. But yeah, that's the intention. So please send more cases so that we have the ability to discuss them more thoroughly, and also to start further refining our guidance. Again, this is really important for us. I don't know how you would like us to proceed. Shall I try and... Yeah.
We have a general question as well from Gabriella. Just if an organization already has a privacy policy in terms of use, then where can they upload them onto the portal?
I don't know. Luciano?
Sorry, may you please repeat? I missed your question.
It's in the chat. It's from Gabriella saying, if an organization has a privacy policy in terms of use already, then where can they upload them onto the portal?
No, okay, it's quite easy, sorry. You don't have to upload the documents into the portal. What you have to do is, when you onboard a new service, you have to provide some information. Concerning privacy policy and the terms of use, you only have to put the link of these documents into the appropriate fields of the profiles of the service. They should stay where they are in the web pages of the resource you are onboarding.
Thanks, Luciano. So if I understood correctly, this is not needed right now. Only if we add new services, we need to add the link of the privacy policy in terms of use.
Unfortunately not, in the sense that from mid-March onwards, these two documents will become mandatory for all services onboarded into the EOS portal. So if you already onboarded services into the EOS portal without this information, you have to update the entries and provide this information. Otherwise, these entries will be disabled starting from April.
Okay, thanks. I'll check what we have added in the portal, and there's a field, I assume, for privacy policy and terms of use.
One field for privacy policy and one for terms of use in
Perfect.
the administration part.
Perfect, thank you. And another question, if I may, a quick one. Is there an email address to obtain support? Because I asked this question via the ticket system and I didn't get a reply. So just for future.
For what?
For future reference, what's the email address to obtain support?
Well, for obtaining support about onboarding of services, the email address is the usual one, onboarding@eos-portal.eu. I will put this address in the chat. For this kind of support, specific support about privacy policy and terms of use, maybe, I don't know, Prodromos, what do you suggest? It's not something related to the onboarding, so the onboarding email address cannot be used. Maybe we could create a specific email address or use already.
I think so. I mean, either use an existing one, but somewhere to channel these kinds of requests.
Maybe we could publish this information after this workshop on the EOS Future page, where there is all the information about this workshop.
Mm-hmm.
Together with
that's a good option as well. Okay, we have about. Do we have another half an hour, or am I right? Or not?
Yes, there's 30 minutes left.
All right. Let me. Sorry for pushing this through, but let's see now the the privacy policy that Alexandre had the he or she. Is it she or is it he? Alexandre.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. Okay, so thank you for sharing. The answer was answered. And let me just go through this again with you. Okay, we have the name of the service, VIP, services for the distributed execution scientific application. Okay, it's a generic description of the service, which makes sense. We'll return to this one and see if it's adequate later. Data controller, again, here the contact person you see is the DPO. We are fine with that, because even the DPO, even if it's not necessarily the person who's going to resolve the issue, she is the one who's going to share it with the relevant persons in the organization. Again, here, if I understand correct, CNIL is the equivalent of the data protection, is the data protection authority in France, correct?
Yes, correct, exactly.
Yeah, so that's fine. Okay, the EGI ones, the data collected by VIP. Okay, this is it's a very good one, because it actually it explains the different purposes of usage of different types of information. I don't see anything about the name and family name. Why you need those?
It's just to register inside the platform, but doesn't. It's just to need for the different register. That's why.
True, but since you have everything else, it would be nice, because you're very clear about why you need country, why you need institution, why you need email, and the logs as well.
Okay,
So
it was just a classical register, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
don't. Okay.
No personal data disclosed to third parties.
Tommy is just made a comment in the chat there that the legal basis is missing.
I haven't reached that stage yet. So let me go bit by bit. Third parties. You have this sentence: technical staff managing the various services used within VIP may have access to some of the pieces of information described in sections A and B. These technical staff, they are INSA people, or they are from other organizations.
Normally, it should be only INSA people.
Then it shouldn't be in the third parties.
Okay.
Contact VIP support team, that's fine. Personal data is deleted on request of the user. 15. Yeah, I think that's fine. The question is, if it's not, if it is being used, how long is it going to be retained? And I think the expression here would be it's data, personal data are retained for as long as the service is in operation. Other than that, and then you start what you have written here. It's deleted upon request, or if the user hasn't used the service for 15 years, and you explain why this is the case. Okay, data protection code of conduct, this is not correct. The answer here, I would have instead, if you have a specific code of conduct, or if you don't, that you don't. Other than that, and of course, as someone noticed before, and Venkat has brought that to our attention, the legal basis is missing. So we need to have the legal basis here.
Okay, all right.
And since you have different purposes for the processing of data, you may need to have, you may have, I'm not saying you should, you may have multiple legal bases per type of processing.
Okay.
And purpose of processing. But I think this is a nice template because it provides the relevant information. What I would like to see, and I see in that sense, the templates could be improved. We have this point here, this field here says how to access, rectify, and delete the personal data and object to its processing. Instead, I would have as a phrase, how can I, or how can the data subject exercise its rights, and then have it within a parenthesis what these rights are. And of course, normally we put all rights and we see what can be accessed, what can be exercised. But I just wanted to remind you that is not this is not necessarily the case. What I mean, depending on the legal basis, you have a different set of rights as data subject, which you can exercise. And in that sense, the legal basis is of particular importance. So if the legal obligation is the legal basis for managing the your rights, for exercising your rights, for processing your personal data, then it's not all the rights that you can have. And let me share with you for a second a slide from my presentation that I showed you the previous time, which I think is quite useful. So you see here we have multiple legal bases, and here on the vertical axis we have the multiple legal bases, and the horizontal ones we have the rights. And you can see you cannot exercise all rights properly in all cases. And of course, this table needs to be, I need to provide further explanations. For instance, you cannot exercise the right of erasure in the case of contract, but this is because the contract wouldn't be valid anymore. Or you cannot exercise the right of deletion in the legal obligation for the same reasons, or objection. So the thing, what I'm trying to say is that I would like to see in the template, ideally, a more generic description of the kinds of rights that the data subject has. So it's not just access rectification, deletion, and objection. It could be other types of rights which are being exercised, that could be potentially exercised. But this is strictly related to the legal basis you choose. So I think, and that's perhaps the subject for our next following seminar, is to think about the legal basis of what we're doing. And I'm saying that again, going back to Maggie's point, that it could be that we have some suggestions as to which your legal basis could be. Because of the nature of the services, we can certainly make some suggestions. I think it's also a policy question of why you're doing that. So to what extent do you wish to go to the route of obtaining consent from the data subject, which it could be, for instance, in the case of VIP, for the email, if we're using it for something in addition to the main service. But it could be that this is something which is part of a contract, which effectively is being conducted between the end user or the institution and the service provider, or it could very well be legal interest. On the contrary, issues like retention of data, which is being done for auditing purposes, it could be under legal obligation, and collection of data which are being used for research, it could be under public task. So it's up to us to understand what we wish to do. For me, a crucial question is to what extent do we think that the contract is being set up between the user of the service and the service provider. If that is the case, then the legal basis should be the contract. If we see that more as something which relates to the legal interest of the organization, we should go down that path. But I would invite you all to also consult with your legal advisors within your organization to tackle this issue. And especially if you have a DPO, what her or his opinion on that is. And it would be very interesting to discuss this further in our next seminar. So I don't know, Alexander, if there is anything else you wish us to discuss in this context, or I should go with Maggie's document as well.
No, it's fine for me. Thank you so much.
Excellent. So let me. Andrea has a question. What if the technical staff managing the services belongs to the non-legal entity who run the service, but not to the controller? Oops, I'm lost here. Should they be mentioned in the section third parties to whom personal data is disclosed? And do they need an official appointment? Normally, if the technical staff managing the services is a third party in the sense of a legal entity, for instance, I hire a company as a contractor to manage my services, then that's a data processor. And it certainly needs to be a contract between the data controller and the data processor, ensuring that the data processor is going to provide the exact same level of service as the data controller does. So I think that's one way to approach it. If these are physical, natural persons that are actually doing that, then they have some sort of contract with me. So in effect, I wouldn't necessarily call them data processors. They should be part of the data controller. So still, the burden of the whole thing is on the entity who's the legal controller, and this entity has to cascade these obligations to the natural person through the contract they do with them. So if I am an IT personnel which I have been hired to offer these services for that particular project, and I'm paid X amount of money, I have to have in my contract provisions as to how I should treat personal data. Now, the third case is that there is no contract as such, but there is an MOU between the two members, because we have developed different parts of the service as entities, as legal entities, as part of a common project, or we feel that this is something which is useful for projects we do. In that case, we need an MOU or something. Again, we need a contract which actually expresses the framework within which the processing of the data takes place. So in all cases, whether we call it a controller, or if it's someone that works for us, it's a controller. If this someone is a natural person, then it's an employee or a contractor, and we have to see again in the contract how the processing is being handled. And if this is another legal entity, but not a contractor, but rather a more equal legal entity, then this should be tackled through a consortium agreement or an MOU between the parties. I don't know, Andrea, if I managed to answer your question.
Yeah, sorry, I was writing on the chat, forgot that I can speak. Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's exactly the third case actually. So it is another institutes for a project. We develop a service together, but the service is actually run by the other institute. So in that case, yeah, it's the memorandum of understanding.
An MOU would be useful, would be advisable, even if you have a consortium agreement. If the consortium agreement does not cover this aspect of your relationship, I would strongly suggest you draft an MOU. Would really make sense.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's go now to Maggie's point. I think with that we will conclude our very interesting seminar today. I have to say I'm really enjoying it today. It's a very interesting one, because I see a lot of different documents. Okay, let me share my screen again. All right. Okay, first of all, here we have a legal entity, which is ICOS Eric. That's an Eric. So it is a legal entity. It's clearly the data controller. Now, this is a very different philosophy, by the way. They're asking the same questions, but that's a very human-friendly way of putting it there. So it's more like a website document trying to explain. Okay, so you also see this one, which it describes the data here. It explains the purpose of processing here. It explains the duration of retention here. And finally, it gives you the legal basis. So while it is a text, it actually gives you all the basic elements that you need to have. By the way, I'm a bit ambivalent as to whether consent is the correct legal basis here, because if these functions can be used without providing an email address, there's not much of a choice. So it's not really free consent. This looks more like a contract. But unfortunately, I think Maggie is not with us. She had to leave, if I understand right. Otherwise, I would like to understand a bit better what it means. Contact information, this is certainly voluntary. So this is consent. Registration services. It's also here, they make a reference to Article 6, which is the legal basis for GDPR, to be very, very precise as to how they understand consent. And that's useful, especially for non-EU members. Again, IP address, cookie. Again, cookie is not always consent, sometimes legitimate interest. Similarly, The email here could be seen initial as legitimate interest, but they make a choice. Now, this is an interesting point. What happens in cases where you could process the data under a legal basis that does not require consent, and you still go for consent? I think that's a pretty safe bet, because consent pretty much covers everything, unless there is legal obligation, and in that case, or public task, consent is really makes no difference. So again, the question would be to what extent this makes sense. I mean, it's extra work for the data controller, but it's certainly good for the data subject because they can withdraw consent. Now, I'm a bit, again, with cookies, you need to make sure that you differentiate cookies which are necessary for the service to be provided and cookies you can reject. Now, here it says denying this cookie necessarily prevents Carbon Portal login. So I don't know how exactly it works without having the Carbon Portal login service working. But if you cannot deny it and there is a consent as a legal basis, is wrong. So I would love to discuss it more. Yeah. Who gets my data? So here also, you see, it doesn't ask for your consent after you gave your initial consent for your data to be processed, because here you also consent them to be transferred in third country in the United States through Google Analytics or MailerLite. Now, in relation to the discussion we had before, here you have a kind of a high-level description of security measures, but these security measures, you can see the first one has to do with the encryption and the reverse proxy. The second point has to be with who is the person which is allowed to have access to such data. And it also explains to you where the computer services are. You can see here again the rights that they have, that the data subject has, and this is the ones that you have without conditions. The rights that actually require a condition, and explains to you why. And it also tells you how to exercise them. And you can see here again a reference to the DPO, plus another web page where you can find another part of the website where you can find more information about your rights. And also you can see the latest update of the policy and how you're going to be updated in relation to the notice to the website. So I think this is a pretty good policy, because I think it's pretty complete, it's easy to read, and at the end of the day, it gives you all the necessary information. In order for me to make a full assessment, which again, it's on the detail, I would like to ask them why do they actually make such a big reference to, why do they use so extensively consent? But that could be a policy decision to make sure that people are involved. This is something which I think, other than that, everything else is fine in this policy. That's a pretty good example of how a policy could be drafted. I don't know if you have any questions on what we've gone through.
A question to the audience, to the people who expose their documents. Would you give your permission to link to put the link to your documents into the workshop website so that people can have a look again at this information and understand better what's going on here and what are the topics we discussed. So Alexandra is willing to have this link. What about the other people? Okay. Carl Frederick. Okay, very good. So we will ask Maggie afterwards.
If there is time, then maybe we can quickly go through the document that Amanda shared.
Yeah, give me a second and let's do this now.
And indeed, we have another one from Joshua as well.
I think let's see what we can do with this one. I'll go quite fast. So we have 9 minutes. Let me try my best.
Hi, well, hi, I'm Amanda here. Well, this is the terms of use of the tool, but maybe it's better to look at the privacy policy because it is shorter and is very similar to the one of that has been presented in the BIP. So,
by the way, I think this is an interesting policy. We don't have the time to go through this now. I think it would be unfair. But it's an interesting one because the first terms of use we see actually today.
Yeah, that's right.
But in 8 minutes, that's not a good idea. Let me see the privacy stuff.
Yeah, that's why I said that.
Ours is a bit simpler, so maybe yeah, 8 minutes can suffice.
Where is the privacy?
Sesta.
No, I'll see the SESTA. I'm just asking Amanda.
Yeah, I'm adding the link again. Yeah.
Okay.
I have been taking notes from the other examples of our colleagues, and I have some ideas to improve this, but I want to hear from you.
By all means, just give me a second to paste it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can see my screen now, or perhaps you see the previous one. Let me just make sure you see the correct one. It's loading.
Yes, now it's okay.
Okay, URLs are fine, name fine, description seems all right. I'm always a bit reserved to revisit at the end. Take data controller, just make sure this is correct. When you have a university, just make sure that's not a separate legal entity who's responsible for the processing. In quite a few cases, it's not, it's the university itself, but just make sure that this is correct. Again, you have the A and B in the personal data. Purpose. Okay, the way I read it and I understand it, log files are going to be, by the way, all data are personal here. Log files are personal data. You need to differentiate between everything but personal data. So from A to F in A and B. So just make sure that we know we are speaking about the same things. Log files containing personal data maintained for a limited period of time, after which they are deleted. Amanda?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, and so that's the log files. You don't retain anything else.
No, not really. Yeah.
Okay, how to access rectify. Same thing. Data retention for the rest of the personal data, other than the log files, you should be explicit that they retain for as long as the service runs, or
Okay.
Upon request by the user. By the way, you need to explain the implications. So if they are deleted, what does it mean for the service? Can it be provided to them anymore? Okay. By the way, if you're using Google Analytics, it could be that you're transferring some of your data to the United States. So these are the third parties, if you think this is relevant. Also, in terms of personal data, you need to talk about how cookies collect personal data. Is this the log files? Or do we need to have something more explicit in the personal data, more precise in the personal data process? And I'm also liking I haven't found the legal basis unless I missed it.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's missing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's all right. It needs changes here and there on the basis of the things we have discussed today.
Yeah.
Okay, let me go to the last one, which is by this is the one by Joshua. Okay, that's also a very good one, that you differentiate between website cookies, between the different services. That's brilliant. Again, a very good point, precisely because you have multiple sources of getting information. What I would do, it would be really helpful. I would have a table where I would have source, type of service, or type of, let's say, touch point with a user or service, and how data are being collected in each one of them, which data are being collected in each one of them. And again, you can see here you have legitimate interest. So I would make at the end of the table, I would say service or whatever, personal data collected, and then I would have legal basis for each one of them. So for instance, in cookies, we don't see where the what the legal basis is. Newsletter is consent. Again, you transfer data outside the EU. In certain cases, you have legitimate interest. In certain cases, consent, and that's fine. Okay, going faster. Where is data storage? Okay, on a server in Germany, that's fine. If you know exactly where and by whom, that would be great. If not, I think it's sufficient what you have here, but it would be a slightly more detailed.
Where do you want us to be detailed? Where the data is stored?
Yeah, what's not clear to me by this one is to what extent this implies a relationship of a data processor and data controller. I'm looking really fast if it is anywhere else. Yeah. So if in this thing here, where you collect the data and they are being stored on a server in Germany, that means this is the server that SESTA operates, or is it someone else? Similarly with Google, I don't necessarily need the address, which for security reasons, it could be something that you don't wish to disclose, but we need to know whether this is something you do it or someone else does it for you. Okay?
Okay, so we need to be explicit on whether we do it on our own data center or we've outsourced it to some other third party hosting it. Is that what you want us to specify?
Precisely, because that implies that, or that not implies, this has as a direct consequence that you may have what you call a data controller, a data processor, for which you need to have a contract with, which you have, by the way, for sure. But just this data processor should have agreed to your data policies. Again, duration of storage, since you have a lot of different services here and types of processing, I would do a table.
Okay.
Because you have a lot of things, I would do a table for this one for duration. And again, I would do a table for the writes because they are not the same for all types of services you have. The rest are fine. No, that's another, I think that's a pretty good policy, by the way. I just would like to have a bit more clarity on the legal basis. You know, these things, tables are extremely useful. It's useful for you as well. Because even if they repeat themselves, certain items, it's still important to understand for each one of them what you do. And again, perhaps it could be a single table. This is also a matter of presentation, information presentation. But the idea is that I have the type of service, the data collected, the legal basis, retention as well, if at all. I mean, duration of retention and legal basis of retention. And if there is any kind of third-party processing, or you have a controller processor relationship. Yep, and I think we are there.
Thank you.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Prodemos, for taking the time, for taking these 90 minutes. And thank you, of course, to all of you participants for joining us. Thank you on behalf of the EOS Future team. The good news is that the contents of this workshop have been recorded and will be made available to you as soon as possible. I believe we've already established that further questions and further inquiries are possible, as we've now seen, as you all know by now, and probably the topic is extremely complex and does require kind of significant attention. I'm glad that so many of you seem to find it useful. Feel free to send us your feedback and to reach out in case there is further interest in the matter. I will now leave you to your lunch break, your breakfast, your evening, your rest, hopefully. Take care, everyone.
Sorry, Andrea,
of course,
I have to interrupt you. So just to summarize where to address questions. So we have decided today that the questions concerning the onboarding of services should go to the onboarding mailing list, as well as the description of the use cases we have identified, and also, of course, additional use cases which may be identified afterwards. Then there should be another email address to be published on the website of this workshop, where to address questions concerning these two documents. This will have to be defined. We will discuss this internally, and then we will publish this address on the workshop website. This is all on my side.
Thank you so much, Luciano. Thank you for the clarification. Once again, I'm glad that you could join us for this workshop. I look forward to seeing some of your faces in the future, maybe in other trainings and workshops, maybe at other events. PISA's coming up for some of you. And until then, take care, all the best in your work and your research, and see you soon. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.